and stretch your legs, ready for another hour of inspiring talks, I'm sure. So up first we have Jen, Louise, Sophie and Jenny from the University of Manchester talking about the power of active self-feedback. Over to you guys.
Thanks so much, Katie. So this is some work that we've been doing really over the last 18 months or so at the University of Manchester, and I'm joined by the fabulous Jenni Rose, who's going to also be speaking to some of these slides later on. The name Jennifer is not a requirement to do work on assessment at the University of Manchester, but there are quite a few of us who are doing so. So let's kick off. So, oh, it's not letting me move on. Oh, there we go. So usually when we think of assessment and feedback, this is something that I know a lot of people are focusing on, and I probably don't need to convince the people on this Zoom call that this is something that we need to be paying attention to. So we see that student satisfaction with assessment and feedback are some of the lowest NSS scores that we see right across the sector. And usually when we think about assessment and feedback, or at least when I think about it in my context, I usually imagine a student who completes some kind of assessment and then they receive feedback on that assessment. Sometimes that feedback might be automated if it's the case of an MCQ quiz of some kind. It might be peer feedback, but more often than not, it's feedback from the teacher. And what we would really like our students to do in these situations is to really make use of that feedback, because we've written it because we want to help the student to understand what they've done well and areas that they can develop so that they can really use that to enhance their learning moving forward. But all too often, and it would be great if I could get some smiles from people on the screen to tell me I'm not alone in this case. All too often, sometimes I feel that what actually happens to the feedback that I've spent all that time cultivating for my students is something more like this still that we have here. So this is Montgomery Burns saying, thank you very much for your feedback while he's shredding it. And sometimes I have the impression that my students, even if they're not doing something like this, but in some ways the feedback that we're giving them isn't useful to the student. It might not come at the right time, or it might not be in the student's vernacular in order for them to really kind of take action and to understand what this feedback means and the goals that's in there and how they can really use this to propel their learning forward. So when I was sort of thinking about some of these things, I incorporated some things into my own practice and then had a conversation at a conference with Jenni Rose, who's also at the University of Manchester, and realised that actually something I was doing by instinct, Jenni was doing very deliberately. And I came across the concept of inner feedback, or students' active feedback. So inner feedback is the new knowledge that students generate for themselves when they compare their current knowledge against some reference information that's guided by their goals. And this was something that was really introduced into the literature by David Nicol, who's up in Glasgow. So can we start getting students, rather than having them wait for feedback from the teacher, can we encourage students to write feedback for themselves on their work and then use that feedback to really learn and enhance their performance for whatever's coming next? So rather than the traditional model that I started out with, where a student completes an assessment and they get feedback from the teacher, what about instead of that, we gave students something to compare their own work to. We gave them a comparator. That comparator might be a first-class essay, or it might be the mark scheme, or it might be something else. And then we get the student to compare their work to that comparator and then write their own feedback. You get the student to really make explicit what was previously implicit, if it happened at all, and encourage the student to think about how they can use that comparator to improve their own work. This is really the basis for active self-feedback. So I tried it. Because I'm a psychologist, like just about everybody else on the call, I supervise final year project students, as I'm sure many, if not all of you do. So this is some work that I've done over the previous academic year with my final year project students. So we got a total of 109 undergraduate participants. So these participants were all psychology students in year 1 or 2 of their programme. And we did this work with my final year students who were testing these more junior students for their projects. And what we did was we gave participants an academic paper. an edited version of a published academic paper. The topic was change blindness because my PhD was in attention, and this is something that I've always been interested in, but I don't think the topic is particularly important. So we gave students a copy of an edited version of that paper. Now, we'd removed the abstract, and we did this in a classroom, so students couldn't just look up the abstract kind of conveniently on the internet while they were doing this. And we got our students to write an abstract for that paper. We then gave our students a comparator. Now, those comparators, we had 4 different conditions, one of which was the mark scheme. So we just gave our students the marking rubric. Oh, my video's turned off. Can it come back on? Don't know how my video turned off there. Sorry, folks. So we gave our students the mark scheme that we would usually use to mark their abstracts. We gave them the marking rubric. In condition 2, we gave students feedback on their abstract from ChatGPT. Now, I asked my students, how are you using generative AI to kind of help you do your writing? And my students told me that in a situation like this, what they would do is submit their abstract along with the marking rubric and say, hey, ChatGPT, please can you use this marking rubric to tell me how I can improve my work? So that was the prompt that we gave ChatGPT. It's what the students told us that they were most likely to be using. Condition 3 was feedback from the teacher. So I marked all 109 of these abstracts very quickly and gave students feedback on how they could improve their abstract. And our 4th condition was a first class example abstract. So something I hear from my students very often is, please can I see an example first class essay or lab report or whatever it is, so that they can compare their work to that. So these were the 4 conditions that we used, our 4 different comparators. We then asked students to use that comparator along with their original abstract to write themselves feedback on how they could improve their abstract and then revise their abstract in line with that feedback. I then marked all of the abstracts again. I was blind to the different conditions and gave a mark to the abstracts both before the comparator and feedback and afterwards so that we could compare the change. What did we find? So this is a bar chart here, and you can see our 4 different conditions coming down the side and the mean change, or it turned out to be an improvement in mark between the pre and post conditions. And what you can see here, the animations have gone a bit weird, is we had a significant main effect of the different comparator types on the change in students' marks, such that the teacher feedback, so feedback from me, the teacher, was still reliably better than the feedback we got from ChatGPT or from the first class example, but not reliably different from just giving students the mark scheme. Giving them the mark scheme also wasn't reliably different from the ChatGPT or the first class example. So what I can really conclude from this is that all of the comparators reliably improved students' marks. Didn't matter which one we gave them, marks reliably went up. But what the comparator was mattered, and feedback from the teacher was still associated with the biggest increase in marks. So this was a controlled experiment. It was done under controlled conditions, but what we're really interested in is how this works in situ or in reality. Does this work across different assessment tasks? Does it work across disciplines? Can we train our colleagues to do that? And if we do so, because I'm a cognitive neuropsychologist, we think about the acceptability of interventions. How acceptable is it to both students and staff to do this kind of thing? And does it work? Over to you, Jenny.
It was really fascinating to hear Jen's excitement about this when we were talking about it. And this is myself, well, it's an animation of myself and Jen and Louise Walker, who is in mathematics, to see how these ideas actually translate across different topics and different types of assessments. When we started talking about the way that we're assessing, we realised actually we thought this would go quite far across the university, but would students accept it? So we set up a flexible learning pilot. We included a student partner, and she was incredible. Was she not, Jen?
She was outstanding. If you've never worked with a student partner, I highly recommend it on the basis of N of 1, because ours was bad.
She worked really hard to not only give us the student viewpoint and how this might land with students when they're asked to write feedback from themselves, but also to see how to collect evidence and collect case studies from across the university, across different disciplines, different subjects, different assessment types, to look at the different comparators and try and work out the effect that would have on the students' learning, and as well as show them as examples to show how this is very translatable across different contexts. So yeah, she was absolutely brilliant. What we managed to do is we managed to get 15 academics to write up what they did. They did this self-feedback across 18 modules, and you can see some of the examples on this AI drawn tree, which shows the different areas that actually this translates to. And this was all collected and put together in this e-learning, which I'm sending in the chat now. And that shows you a lot of the theory behind self-feedback, but also shows you these different examples of ways that it could be translated across the university. So it's really exciting to put together the quite scientific work that Jen's done around which are the best comparators, but also the different ways this could be translated across different subjects and different types of learning. We found that it was really effective. No matter what the discipline was, no matter what the comparator was, students always made gains from doing this. Yes, it's challenging to get students to do this, to get students to buy into actually realizing the difference they can make on their own without us. But when they do, they grow in confidence, they grow in their judgmental abilities, and they're able to see their work through the eyes of the teacher, and that's very transformative in terms of their own intellectual development as well. They realize that they don't need feedback literacy because they're writing in a way that they can understand. They're starting to have a lot more independence, and it's giving them the skills to have lifelong learning. To be able to think critically about their own work, not just rely on that teacher all the time. Even though that teacher feedback is really effective, and we're not saying teachers shouldn't be in this process, which is exactly what Jen's found in her study, but also but that students can actually do more than they think they can, and having that shown to them is quite empowering for them.
Thanks so much, Jenny. So I think really what we've learned from this is that it works reliably across assessment types and across disciplines. I was, to be completely honest, kind of hoping that I'd find that there are other ways of giving students feedback that are just as effective as feedback from the teacher. But unfortunately, that's not quite what my data shows, but maybe that just means that we're not all redundant just yet. But I think if you can put this in, if you can embed this into your practice, it's only likely to be a good thing and help the students to develop. So Jenny has put a link to some resources that we've created to really help other academics to implement this and embed it into their own practice if they wish to. And you can also find a copy of the slides that I've given a link to in the chat. But for now, I think that's everything from us.
Thank you very much, guys, and also brilliantly timed as well. Thank you. We have plenty of time for questions. So I have a question myself, but I also don't want to take advantage of chair privileges. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to, or you can just pop your microphone on and ask away, or you can make a react symbol. But while anyone's thinking, I'll ask away if that's okay. So that was really interesting. Thanks very much. And Jen, I just read your comment before in the Padlet about the AI aspect of the intervention. And I wondered how much of a role you thought that had if you just use like one kind of static aspect of AI, when in reality students will probably use it like 20 different ways. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. So yes, because I'm a cognitive psychologist and we wanted to control as much as we could and only sort of change one thing to look at that as the variable of interest, we did just have one prompt that we put into ChatGPT. Whereas exactly as you say, Thomas, actually students might use this as more of a coaching kind of tool to help them kind of refine and have more of a dialogue with the AI to do this. So I think I'm also going to be running experiments similar to this in the upcoming academic year with my new project students. And I think that's going to be one of the hypotheses that we're going to be looking to be testing. So I think it might have made an impact. I don't know. Watch this space. Come and ask me next year and I might have a better answer for you.
No, that's a very good answer. Thank you. Okay, any other questions anyone has? I'll just check the chat.
I think there's quite an interesting question about it's a reflection of how good you are at marking or giving feedback, Jen McBride. And I think, yeah, it's really interesting to think about the difference between what this would look like if you had a graduate assistant giving feedback versus teacher feedback. I'll let Jen comment on how she found that in her controlled experiment, but in general, I find that with the right prompts, students can write very, very effective feedback for themselves. They can write it so it's very motivational and it's very personalised. So I did some work for 500 students and looking at the actual feedback they'd written for themselves. And there's actually a paper that shows how actually what students write for themselves can surpass what the teacher would write for them. So I think that with the right prompts, and that's where the teacher comes in, getting these prompt questions to be very effective, students can actually write very strong feedback for themselves that's personalised, that's motivating for them, and that actually increases their confidence in their own work.
I agree with Jenny. I suspect actually that because if students write the feedback for themselves, it necessarily comes at the right time for them. They don't have to wait for me as the teacher to provide the feedback and wait weeks for it in between assignments. I also think it's necessarily written in a language that students can understand. Because they've written it themselves, they don't have difficulty interpreting it and then kind of applying it to their work. In terms of, is it a reflection of how good I am at marking or giving feedback? Thank you very much, but I don't think so. And I don't think so because I did train my final year project students to also provide this feedback. So we also had the final year project students provide the feedback. So I trained them to do it, but nonetheless, it was them who was giving the feedback. And I did just do a comparison of marker versus increase in mark, and there was no reliable kind of effect there. So I suspect that wasn't just what caused it, but we do need to sort of, it was my first attempt at doing this in a really controlled kind of way. So we'll try it again and we'll just see if the same thing happens.
Cool. Well, thanks very much for that. And next up, I'm